Your news, your views, your values. This is WMNF Tampa 88.5 FM.
You are tuned to WMNF Radio 88.5 FM in Tampa. This is the public affairs program called Community Speaks. I'm your host, Patro Mabili, and I got a lot to talk to you about this week. You can also give us a call or an email, wmnf.org, and you can also text us. But there's so much to talk about. We are beginning this week looking at a lot of developments. Yesterday was Democracy Day, and we will talk about media collaborative and what role newsrooms have in sustaining and defending democracy. And we will also talk about how AI, artificial intelligence, supercharges the threat of disinformation in what is a big year for elections globally. And today we will shine a spotlight on the new scramble for Africa, the influence of Russia and the United States on the continent through mercenaries and private contractors. And today, September 16th, is Ozone Day, or the International Day to Protect the Ozone. This year's theme picks up on the Montreal Protocols and focuses on advancing climate action. And also, state and local governments face the deadline to use billions of dollars of pandemic aid. And finally, reporting on the progress or the backlash of the declaration made by cities that racism is a public health crisis. This is Community Speaks, and of course, you can write me at djwmnf.org. And, last week we didn't make our goal. We're only $160 below fundraising goal last week. So if you can help, please go to wmnf.org and hit the donate button. It'd be very much appreciated. But right now, this is Community Speaks, and of course, we want to talk to you about all of these issues. And as I said, yesterday was Democracy Day, and but I also want to pick up on some of the developments that cities were making in public health being racism being a public health crisis, and also Democracy Day yesterday. We want to pick up on some of those issues. There's a lot that is correlative, and we know, just listened here on WNF to sustainable living, and that was a very interesting topic. The role that capitalism is playing on all of this, I think that's what pulls all of these issues together. Who's benefiting and who's not benefiting in this world. And I think one of the most important questions I heard last hour was, if capitalism is so great, why is there so much homelessness? And I think that landlords, property managers, are some of the most powerful people in this country because they can get away with anything, including rendering people homeless. And what happens to them? What laws are coming to bear to bring more power to the tenant, more power to the people, and reduce the power of landlords in this world, in this country especially? I think they have way too much power. But as I said, what role can newsrooms play in talking about issues of democracy? And as I said, yesterday was the International Day of Democracy. It was created back in 2007 by the United Nations General Assembly, and it was created to encourage its member countries to strengthen and celebrate democracy. In the U.S., Democracy Day Journalism Collaborative was launched in 2022, and it was for one tweet from a journalist that wondered aloud about the role newsrooms have in sustaining and defending in democracies. And the initiative is coordinated by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, and in partnership with staffers from Hurricane and Solution Journalism Network. Democracy Day is overseen by a group of advisors. But in 2024, this year, the iteration of U.S. Democracy Day is funded by Democracy Fund and other private foundations. But the role in local news and our reporting is essential to the success of any democracy, and readers rely on coverage of local communities to inform them, to know what issues are impacting them. It equips them with the critical knowledge to act when needed, and that empowers them to speak up and participate with it. That's the whole role of WNF, and especially of public affairs programming like this one. But Democracy Day helped fund the creation of 2 democracy correspondent roles in media watchdog publication, The Objective, leading to stories on how the layoffs, for instance, of unionized black journalists have made it all difficult for large media organizations to cover democracy in ways that meet the needs of black, Latinx, Asian, or otherwise non-white audiences. And more recently, Democracy Day developed a reporting curriculum that infuses basic civics lessons into the college-level journalism courses. It's important to understand civics more than anything, especially if you're going to be covering communities and covering elections. But Democracy Day Collaborative is the latest in a series of nationwide efforts in the journalism industry to better cover democracy in the U.S. in some newsrooms, including The Guardian and the Associated Press, which we pull from very greatly. But there are also the Tampa Bay Times, who participated in some of this. But democracy in the United States has been backsliding for years. Fact-based journalism outlets must adjust to this new context to help the public understand and know in certain terms what's at stake in elections, from local school boards, city councils, to state and national officials. Democracy Day is an important effort in equipping reporters for this critical moment. That's from the CEO of one of these collaborative organizations. But especially when you come down to reporting on racism and black communities and other communities of color, it's important to understand, for newsrooms to understand all of the issues at play. And we know that one of the other threats to democracy, as I've pointed out, is going to be AI and how it's supercharging disinformation in this big year. And that's, an important thing to remember, that we got to be careful what we are repeating, because a lot of it is our disinformation, and the technology is getting so good, it's impossible to know what's a deep fake and what isn't. But the impact of artificial intelligence deep fake tied to elections hasn't been as severe as some feared this year, but a wave of misleading AI-generated content did hit elections early this year in places like Europe and Asia, and it served as a warning for countries with upcoming elections, including right here in the United States, what the technology is capable of. But the question is no longer whether AI deepfakes could affect elections, but how influential they will be, and who runs a there's some consultants who are consulting firms that are looking at how deepfakes are impacting news coverage. And as the U.S. presidential race heats up, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, has warned about the growing threat, saying generative AI makes it easy for foreign adversaries to engage in malign influences. And we've seen and heard many stories about what foreign governments are able to do in terms of disinformation and getting people confused, rallying people up and letting groups use their websites and their newspapers to promote their propaganda, especially Russia. And we're seeing Russia operate all over the world right now, and especially on the continent of Africa. Of course, that's something I've been keeping a close watch on, and that is how this scramble for Africa is continuing to create for these countries who are really after the same thing that they've always been after in the last scramble for Africa, and that is minerals, wealth. But the Russian mercenaries in Russia, in Africa, is a cause for deep concern for me, especially as the will of the people are being overturned in places where these mercenaries have emerged and have made it possible, facilitated military juntas taking over the will of the people. But these mercenaries using success in staving off rebels in this impoverished various impoverished nations on the continent, they see it as a model for their expansion. Russia does, and how long Russia has long been accused by locals and rights groups of stripping natural resources such as minerals and timber, and are linked to the torture and the death of civilians in the wake of Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was the Wagner Group's, the mercenary group. He staged a rebellion on his own country, on Russia, and of course, a few days later, he died in a plane crash, and it's considered suspicious, especially by those satellites on the continent of Africa where Wagner is operating right now. And in the wake of his suspicious death, the Russians are recalibrating their Africa operations in the United States, which has been largely disengaged from Africa, from the region for years, is attempting to maintain a presence and stymie Russian gains as it pushes African countries to distance themselves from the mercenaries. So it's going to be interesting to see just how these relationships continue to play out, especially on the continent, and how disinformation will continue to sway voters, not only in this country, but on those countries where the mercenaries are active right now. And at the top of the hour, just because there's so many things that I wanted to talk to you about and get your opinions on, with this today is the International Day for the Preservation of the Ozone. This is also something that's important to talk about and stay abreast of. And this year the theme is going to be on advancing climate action, picking up on what has been called the Montreal Protocol, and that is rightly hailed as a multilateral success story that united the world to phase out ozone-depleting substances. And this is where we get back into talking about capitalism again, but putting the ozone layer on the path to recovery and protecting all life on Earth. And on this World Ozone Day, people are also celebrating its climate action. Phasing out ozone-depleting substances has proven to be a powerful tool for climate action that has helped slow global warming. For example, postponing the first ice-free Arctic summer by up to 15 years, as people have said. But through the Kigali Amendment, climate action is being further accelerated. Countries commit to phase down the production and consumption of hydrofluorocarbons, powerful climate warming gases that replace ozone-depleting substances in these various sectors. And if the amendment is fully ratified, the implementation of warming could be voided by the year 2100. So there's a lot more to talk about on the Ozone Day. But want to hear from you as well. Of course, you can call me at 813-239-9663. And this is the Community Speaks Public Affairs program. And as I've brought a few topics to the board, we want to hear from you. But talking about Russian influence in elections and talking about Russian influence on the continent of Africa, we've seen a trial here locally where that became apparent, and I'm certain that we'll continue to hear more about the Uhuru trial and the fact that they were convicted on conspiracy charges, working with the Russians. Goes to show you just how far and wide the Russians have been trying to influence and gain influence around the world. But there's going to be more talk about that trial and whether they're going to go ahead and try to appeal the conspiracy charge. But there's a lot of confusion around what happened there, but there is no confusion about the fact that Russia's influence campaigns continue around the world, especially here in the United States. So as we are marking Ozone Day and marking Democracy Day and looking at how people are influenced around the world, we're also looking at other issues here locally and statewide, and how states are responding to the declaration of racism as a public health crisis and how that's going and whether or not that's changed U.S. cities, hundreds of municipalities passed resolutions declaring racism a public health crisis after George Floyd was murdered by police in 2020. And even as city and county governments made internal changes and set up task forces to brainstorm how to promote racial equity, racial justice organizers say those don't seem to have made much of a difference in day-to-day life. And here's a look at some of the statements and some of the progress reports on this declaration in various areas. The resolution is simply the opinion of a governing body. While it might be a commitment to change, the resolutions often are not enforceable by law. The racism as a public health crisis declaration look different in each city, county, and municipality. Some may be just one sentence and others are more comprehensive. And look for the section where the governing body outlines the steps it will take and follow up with stakeholders and office holders with questions like how much of this is underway and what needs to be done to complete the steps. If there are not clear, actionable steps in the therefore statements, you can report on the indirect results of such a declaration, including the effects of a government's public acknowledgement of racism or efforts at local health departments that may have been inspired by the declarations. Elected officials and leaders who may have initiated or voted on the resolution can provide insight on some of the behind-the-scenes conversations happening around racial justice and equity. But I do know that here in Tampa, Florida, there was a resolution by the Tampa City Council talking about, for instance, police review boards, which was something that was already underway before the George Floyd murder and the nationwide protests that erupted after that. We see that there was an attempt on the part of legal aid on the city council to say that civilian review board was not lawful, was not constitutional in the state constitution. And then come to find out a few weeks after that there were still some Florida municipalities that still had these police review boards. And so Tampa began to look at the possibility of maintaining its civilian review board. So we're still looking at waiting to hear more about what has come about on that, whether or not the board even still exists. So maybe somebody could call us from the city to let us know what has happened there, because, like I said, council said that it was unconstitutional, and then there were cities who still maintained it, even in the state, even after that was considered unconstitutional. So we'll see if there's been progress made here in Tampa. But community members and racial justice organizers first pushed the idea of racism being a public health crisis, asked them to reflect on, we want to ask them how to reflect, whether they can reflect on what is happening locally and what they wanted to see change. And some resolutions, cities are responding and some are not. But there's, of course, we've seen backlash from conservatives in various states, especially here in the state of Florida. Political conservatives have been driving a backlash and even lawsuits over diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or diversity initiatives like fellowships or anti-bias training in recent years. Most recently, it's led to companies like Ford, Lowe's, and John Deere to step back from DEI policies. And we've even heard the Republicans, after Vice President Kamala Harris stepped into the race, that she was just a DEI hire. And conservatives have been reacting to Tim Walz, the vice presidential on the ticket with Kamala Harris, about his role at the time of the uprising after George Floyd's murder by police. And they've been trying to give Tim Walz some heat on what he did or did not do, because after that, during that nationwide protest, it was the biggest crisis of the Minnesota governor at the time. It was the biggest crisis of his political career in 2020. And the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul erupted after the white Minneapolis police officer murdered George Floyd in 2020. The anger also devolved into looting and rioting that culminated with the burning of a police station. And now that the Democratic governor is Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, his actions and alleged inactions are under the microscope again, and sharp divisions remain over who should bear the bulk of the responsibility for not stopping the violence earlier. And meanwhile, several leaders of the police reform movement say Walz didn't go far enough afterward to promote police accountability. And so, after the black man's murder in 2020, it sparked this nationwide reckoning over racial discrimination and police misconduct. His death and its complicated aftermath tested Walz's leadership at one of the state's most consequential moments. What the governor did or failed to do during and after the violence in Minneapolis and St. Paul drew sharp criticism from Republicans in Minnesota, but nor did it satisfy some progressives who had urged him to take bolder steps to remake policing in the state. So when you look at these two forces, does anything get done? Republicans think you're going too far, and the progressives don't think you're going far enough to bring accountability. And we're seeing that play out in municipalities, and we're seeing that play out right here in the Tampa Bay area with the Tampa City Council, and this question over whether or not it's even constitutional to have a civilian police review board. And of course, those civilian review boards are not concerning themselves with active cases. They're looking at cases that have already been investigated, and we're going back to review. Basically, it's a review to see whether or not police actions were correct and whether or not there should be some redress of what happened and whether or not that was actually justice in any particular case. But a review of the Associated Press based on government documents, consultant reports, news accounts, and video and audio, as well as interviews with families, activists, lawyers, and public officials, painting nuanced pictures on how many governments are handling all of these forces, especially when we look at whether or not there's going to be change in this country. Is change easy? No. But are there forces who want to stop and block progress? Yes. And it constantly happens. And also on the same issue of whether or not there's going to be redress, we're looking also at what's happening in schools. Schools have made slow progress in tackling racial disparities in suspensions. And so advocates for racial justice have pushed for decades to reduce suspension rates in schools, arguing that these harsh punishments disproportionately affected black students and set them down the path of the school to prison pipeline. Black Lives Matter movement and the country's racial reckoning around policing gave more momentum to the parallel movement to bring social justice to the classrooms as well. And have those years of advocacy and countless promises to do better led to real change? Yes, but only in small increments, according to a lot of advocates. There have been some progress in bringing down suspension rates for black students, but massive disparities persist, according to a review of discipline data in a handful of states. We're going to look at what's happening in many states over the coming weeks. I want to hear from people here in Florida, because a lot of these issues, even when it comes to diversity, and of course when it comes to what students are allowed to read in their books, what books are even available, the book bans that have been going on in this state has been a real petri dish of the racial backlash that we see from conservatives. And if you have a conservative governor, can do a lot of damage. And this governor has been working very hard. The governor of Florida has been working very hard on the school boards, trying to put conservatives on the school boards, make school board elections more partisan. But there's been an attempt to roll that back as well. The idea that this governor can make the school boards more partisan, more conservative. He failed in this midterm or in this primary election to get his people on school boards. They lost a lot of their primary elections, so they won't have an opportunity in the general election to get on the school board and stop progress. But we're looking at data from around the country, but I'm very interested in what we're going to see going forward politically here in the state of Florida. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. We're already half an hour into Community Speaks, so I want to hear more from you about all of these issues. And the question, I guess, is whether progress is being made, whether we're talking progress here in the United States, whether we're talking about progress in international relations, progress on climate, and progress in democracy. What do you say? 813-239-9663. And of course, as I also mentioned, we're looking at pandemic aid. State and local governments are facing a deadline now to use billions of dollars of their pandemic aid. The time is ticking for local governments across the U.S. to spend an influx of federal money they received during the coronavirus pandemic. $1.9 trillion, part of the American Rescue Plan, passed by Congress and signed by President Joe Biden in 2021, included $350 billion of aid to states, territories, tribes, counties, cities, and towns. The money known as the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds was intended to provide both immediate aid amid a health crisis and a longer-term boost for communities. That, according to the Biden administration, U.S. Treasury rules gave governments broad flexibility in spending the money, with the greatest leeway reserved for funds that governments categorized as a replacement for revenue lost during the pandemic's economic downturn. The Treasury allowed governments to claim up to $10 million of lost revenue without having to prove it, though governments could submit evidence of more. And the Treasury required governments to file periodic progress reports and set a two-part deadline for using the funds, and governments must obligate all their state and local fiscal recovery funds for specific purposes by the end of this year, or else return the rest of it to the Treasury. Under federal rules, an obligation generally requires a government to place an order for services or property, enter into a contract, or award a grant to another entity. Governments that meet the obligation deadline then must finish spending the funds by the end of 2026. And about 80% of all funds had been obligated as of March, according to most recent data reported to the Treasury by more than 26,500 local, state, and territorial governments. That's right on pace to finish in time, but some governments appear further behind than others. About 1 in 5 governments reported obligating less than half their funds as of this spring, according to AP, the Associated Press. And about 3,500 had obligated less than 25%. That includes 2,260 governments that reported no projects, leaving it unclear whether they had any plans for the money. Some of them may have already used the money but failed to describe the purpose to the federal government. So we're probably going to hear about people misappropriating some of that money. But you can always go and find your state to find out, to look at the spreadsheet of how each state has spent this money, because that a lot of that money should be used, should be repurposed, if legally can be done so, to help a lot of these other social justice issues, especially disparities in schools, and especially in school, out of school suspensions, maybe helping feeding more kids who are poor and can't even get lunch at school. So there's a lot of ways to repurpose these funds that would still be legal, but our state's interested. And so we're gonna take a closer look over the next few weeks at as what state and local governments are doing as they face these deadlines to use pandemic aid. And of course, we also know that the issue of whether or not governments are going to allow the vaccine to continue to be used, given away. So, because of course it has to be updated every year now. We now know more about what we're dealing with. So as these different strains appear, we need a vaccine that corresponds directly to those strains. And are people going to have access to that? And of course, unless governments pay for it, it's going to be very costly. So it's important to know whether or not governments are wisely using funds that are available. But I do want to hear more from what you have to say. 813-239-9663 9663 is the number to call if you want to talk about any of these issues here on Community Speaks, as I put a few things out on the table, including racial justice issues and the backlash to racial justice. What is that really all about? Where are we headed with all of that? As I talk about the declaration of racism as a public health crisis, has it changed U.S. cities? 813-239-9663 as Irene stands ready to take your telephone calls. And you can also email me, dj@wmnf.org. This is Community Speaks.
Yeah, heard them singing, this is Molly and standing on Mama Helen's with the band off key.
Yeah, you can, there's always some good music to play here as well. But we got to get back to the music next hour as Blaney Whalen comes in with It's Music Monday. And we're going to continue the musical programming right here. But right now, this is Community Speaks here on your non-commercial community radio station. And, of course, before we get back to the music, we're going to get an update from The Scoop, which is locally produced news right here at WMNF Radio. But we're trying to localize a lot of these issues, including some of the international issues, as I talked about the impact of Russia on the United States, on our elections, but also on the continent of Africa and the damage that is being done. The human rights record is one that we have to always be aware of. The Russians are plagued by their human rights record on the continent of Africa. 2 years ago in Mali, Wagner, the mercenaries in the army, were accused of executing about 300 men, some suspected of being Islamist extremists, but most were civilians, in what Human Rights Watch called the worst single atrocity reported in the country's decade-long armed conflict. And in Central African Republic, mercenaries trained the army on torture tactics, including how to cut hands, remove nails, throw fuel, and burn people alive. That's according to the watchdog, The Sentry. That's SENTRY. So if you want to look them up and look at more of what is happening globally. But a soldier who spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of reprisal confirmed torture tactics and told the Associated Press he saw mercenaries put a fellow soldier into a sweltering container as punishment. He said people could stay locked in containers for 3 weeks, with many dying inside. Those are some of the tactics that Russia is engaging in on the continent. Russia is refurbishing a military base some 50 miles from Bingai in the Central African Republic. Russia's ambassador to the Central African Republic said the base will improve the country's security. He said the base aims to have 10,000 fighters by 2030 to engage with more African nations. But some countries see Russia's influence as a threat to their own. But conflict analysis say weakening it will be challenging if they won't offer a similar force to pursue armed gains. So it's like the Africans are in a catch-22 situation. Wagner is steeped in the Central African Republic, especially in their security system, and experts say that they will likely prevent those from easily diversifying security partners. But there is pressure coming from the United States. The U.S. has been pushing Central African Republic to find an alternative to Wagner for years. A December 2022 private meeting sought ways to improve security without the mercenaries, but yielded little tangible progress, according to a U.S. official who is familiar with the talks and spoke on condition of anonymity due to the privacy of ongoing discussions. He said they never really got past the confidence building stage. Steps on how XYZ will replace Wagner were abstract, and the door remains open. But if Wagner is cutting off hands, they're not acting any different than the colonialists of yesteryear, like Cecil Rhodes on the continent of Africa, or the Belgians, as they engaged in such punishment for those who wouldn't work the rubber plantations. But more assertive U.S. approach came as it faced new setbacks and tried to rework agreements in the region. Troops left Chad and Niger where they were no longer welcome. So in those places, we've seen Wagner really get some influence, and we're seeing that these military juntas taking advantage, overturned the will of the people, and so democracy is really taking a hit in these places where the Wagner group, is active. That should tell us a lot. The State Department said in a statement earlier this year that it wasn't involved in the decision to establish a private security firm called Bancroft Global Development. Its president, the State Department said it was not involved in the decision to establish Bancroft Global Development's presence in the Central African Republic, but that's there to act as a counterbalance to Wagner. Washington could deny such contracts if it wanted, according to a former contractor in Africa. And the author of the book, The New Rules of War, which I plan to read and I plan to report to you on. This is a book by Sean McFate, who's being heavily reported on this story. The U.S. has used private military companies to reduce American military boots on the ground in Africa, according to the author of this book. And the companies like Bancroft have to play by Washington's rules if they want future governments to work. And so we're seeing this scramble for Africa between Russia and the United States in the use of private contractors as well as the private mercenary group Wagner. So we're going to keep looking at what is happening on the continent, because I think it's very revealing as to what people's, especially Russia's, real intent is on the continent, which doesn't seem to have been any different from the previous colonialists who were there to just strip Africa of its natural resources, its minerals. As I said, as I call it, the new scramble for Africa. 813-239-9662. I see some of you are beginning to call and are also looking for your emails. You can write me, DJ, at WMNF.org. And we're going to talk about all of these issues, and probably, there's a through line with all of it as we talk about globally what is happening. Go ahead, caller. Jeanette from St. Pete. You say what?
Hi. I just want to talk about racism.
Yes.
And how all Trump has to do, or his VP,
J.D. Vance.
Pick, yeah. All they have to do is say one stupid thing, and all their sycophants and conspiracy theorist people jump on it like it's true every time they open their mouths, and they are so freaking dangerous. It makes me sick of what's going on in Springfield right now.
Oh, yeah, racism.
It's just so ridiculous that our country has gotten so dumbed down that people just go, oh, yeah. They're eating animals over there because Trump said so.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about? I mean, we never used to be like this.
I know.
I mean, we used to care about each other, and we used to care about other racial groups. And, I mean, maybe it's because I'm in Florida and I see all the darkness down here, but, maybe it's better in other states and other places, but it sure isn't good in Ohio. I mean, these poor people,
but I think
we are a country of immigrants.
Right. Yeah, I think that what's happening is on the conservative side. That's why, this is just my opinion, but I think that's why they went after celebrities as their leaders, because they can get away with saying anything and nobody really reacts to it. They hid behind the fact that Trump wasn't even a politician, so he can say anything he wants and gravitate to him because these are things. He's a politician now with a record, but that's the reason why they can't face the truth. They have to face the lies, because facing the truth would really expose him and them.
I was watching 60 Minutes last night, and they had a story about how he wants to, he's got all the guys that are the patriots that stormed the Capitol in jail singing with him, while he's singing at a rally. Did you see that? It was just disgusting. Watched 15 minutes last night. So, I mean, they've got everybody just dying for him to become president so he can pardon these guys that and the Proud Boy guy and all these white supremacists and just wreak havoc in our country.
But I think at the end of the day, they're going to find that he doesn't care about them as well. This is really just about himself.
But why wouldn't they realize that now already? I mean, half the people that are in jail know they screwed up. Mm-hmm. They don't care that he doesn't care about them. They just do what he says. They're in a cult.
Yeah, I think it's about. You've heard the statement, own the libs. That's all their movement is really all about.
That is disgusting.
It is. And it's very immature.
Owning anybody, owning anything.
Right. They own nothing.
It's like, you're not going to own us. And there's always going to be us pushing back, just like they're going to push back against us. And so it's going to be this push and pull kind of situation. But, I mean, they've got way too much power now. It's gotten out of hand.
Well, I know the last debate gave us a good example of how to really handle them, and that is ridicule. And that's what they hate the most.
We've been doing that on social media forever.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, it's just more chaos. I mean, we ridicule. We help. They dig in. The other side digs in.
Yeah, but they've been losing ever since. I mean, they look at
not all the Senate races. They haven't been losing. They're still losing. They're still winning down ballot. I mean, we don't know what the heck's going to happen with the Senate.
No.
After this November, I mean, it's scary.
It is.
We should be scared. I know that people don't like fear mongers, but we should be very worried.
Yeah, we should be.
I mean, I have my passport, and I'm ready to go if he gets elected. I'm not going to stick around.
Yeah, but never surrender. I mean, they're making the same point. They're saying they're going to leave.
But I'm not going to sit around and let him take over. I mean, I'm a school teacher. I don't even like anything that's going on here now.
Right.
I mean, telling us what we can teach, what we can say, what we can talk to. We can't help gay kids. I mean, it's stupid. But
you'll be...
You can't even say gay.
Yeah, you'll be surprised at how many people agree with you. It's just that the other side gets a lot of... They get a lot of press, and they're just loud, but I think they're shallow.
They get a lot of attention. Because it makes money for the networks.
Yeah, it's just right. You're right. That's exactly what it is, and that's gonna get the cameras running.
They're all about the money. That's all they're about.
Right, and
I mean, you should see the vile things they say about Kamala, and I'm like, or Kamala, but I'm like, is it because she's black, or is it because she's a woman, or is it because she's an Indian, or I mean, what is the deal with her? I mean,
all of them.
They treat her like they did Hillary Clinton, and I really...
But I think she's got their number, and I think she's been prosecuting herself very well in this election so far.
Well, she carries herself well, but you know how they pulled out that last-minute horrible thing with Hillary Clinton where she could have won if they hadn't done that stupid thing with Comey. The email thing. And I mean, they're going to pull some crap like that. You know it.
Oh, yeah, I expect
I just hope she can recover from it, whatever it is.
The question is, what have we learned from that behavior? We know that they've used lies and disinformation, and so what have we learned not to react to it? I really think that this time is different. I really do. Got to keep hope alive.
I'm just hoping and,
You'll be surprised how many people...
an open mind and hoping that everything goes well. But I'm fearful. I'm sorry to say, but I am, because I know I won't stay in the country if he's reelected. I won't.
Okay, well, you have a right to your opinion and your feelings, but I doubt that you'll be needing to pack up.
Having to move? Okay, well, I hope not.
We keep our hope alive. Thank you, Jeanette.
You're welcome. Thanks for the show.
Certainly. That's Jeanette from St. Pete. Let's go get back to Tampa and see what Sarah has to add to the discussion. Go ahead, Sarah. You say what?
Hi. Hi. Thanks so much for taking my call. I wanted to kind of push back a little bit on something you said about the State Department denying that they have a presence in Africa to kind of push back against the Wagner Group. I mean, my concern is, why would we believe anything the State Department says, especially given that we can't believe anything that Biden says about wanting peace in the Middle East? We know he doesn't. He's doing everything he can to prevent it. And then the other thing that I wanted to just say is that, for me, the MAGA, Make America Great Again, it should be changed to MAWA, MAWA, Make America White Again. That's what this is all about. And the other thing is that, Netanyahu wants to keep this war going, because as soon as the war is over, he's probably going to be put on trial and go to jail for the corruption charges that are pending. And Donald Trump wants to be president because then he can pardon himself.
Yeah.
And he can pardon all of his people, and he can destroy the Justice Department, and he's got the Supreme Court. And the other thing I just wanted to say before I end is that that show Surly Voices, and
yes.
they had a person on. She's on regular, and she's great. Her name's Donna, and she basically said, after Hillary Clinton had her debates with Donald Trump, her numbers went through the roof. She was taking all kinds of donations. She looked like she was good to go, and she wasn't good to go.
Yeah.
And so this whole thing with everybody being so ecstatic about Kamala Harris may or may not wash out. And I just am really concerned that we're all riding high and thinking that this is going to happen. And, it may not. And he's got the Supreme Court, and we may end up in a situation not unlike 2000, where Al Gore won the vote, but George Bush was anointed by the Supreme Court. And I hope that doesn't happen. But if Trump sows enough violence and whatever, and the Supreme Court has to step in, I don't think anybody is in question as to how it will go. So thanks a lot for taking my call.
Yeah, and you're right. Don't rest on our laurels when it comes to that, because we have seen this game before, and that's why you can't put too much trust in the polls, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people are not answering the polls honestly. But I do think that Kamala Harris doesn't have the same baggage that Hillary Clinton had just by carrying the Clinton name. So we'll see. But I think that, we have to be very careful about resting on our laurels on that point, because if you want progress, it's something that you have to constantly work for. And the disinformation is something we have to work against. And we know that there are actors, whether they're inside the United States or globally, who are working together to make certain that we don't progress. And that's something that we have to keep abreast of. We have to keep ourselves aware of. But we want to continue to talk about the issues that are influencing, that help us at the local level and in the state level, because I think that's where elections are decided. They're not necessarily decided at the international level. A lot of the global issues, unless we're in the middle of conflict that include troops, U.S. troops on the ground, usually that would create a right around the leader effect, but I'm not certain that these international issues are going to be the deciding factor in most voters' minds. I think that what's happening in your life, in your state, in your city, are going to have a big impact, which is why it's important that these campaigns do get around, and especially in these, not just in the battleground states because even though we know that's important, that's how elections are decided in this country because the Electoral College is really the decider. It's the installer of the winner, not the popular vote. So it's important to know whether or not these local issues, these state issues are coming to bear, because I think that's where voters are going to make their minds up. I don't think there are too many minds not made up right now. I think most people's minds are made up. Even the independents, they know whether or not which way they're going to go at this particular point. We just got a few minutes left here on Community Speaks, and I do want to hear from as many people as possible. So give us a call, 813-239-9663. That's the number to call if you want to join the discussion about some of the issues that we've raised. But racism is a huge factor in elections all the time. And what's happening at the local level when it comes to racial justice, whether it comes to disparity, and how newsrooms are covering people, all of that comes to impact on a democracy. One emailer has written, it seems like the declaration of racism as a health crisis hasn't led to real change outside of public discussion. Javion McGee was lynched on 9/11 in North Carolina. The jury is still out on that, but the local law enforcement was trying to cover it up. It's still underreported nearly a week later. Police budgets keep going up around the country, but public health and safety still suffers from hate and division, and see that in these incessant hate crimes, there's no reason to increase police presence and budgets when they don't do anything to help and effectively make things worse. Political calls for unity feel so plastic when there's no action or plans to unite people, but there is action to suppress voices and make it harder to give public opinion on the actions of the police by limiting and questioning public review boards for the police. That is an email that came in from Jiminy. Let's see what Layla and Brandon has to add to this conversation. Layla, go ahead. You say what here on the Community Speaks?
There's no reason to quick.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, please turn your radio down.
Yeah, I just turned it down.
Okay, great.
Yeah, just a couple comments. Just nothing about politics from me right now, except to let you guys know that there is a county commission planning meeting tomorrow night to approve an industrial energy park in Dover, and the final vote is tomorrow night with the planning department, and that is going to be built on a phosphate mine, a retired phosphate mine. Always involved in the environment, always involved in feeding the homeless. We still feed 70 people downtown Tampa on Tuesday night, Quarter of Hope. We try to make it a very healthy, good meal for the homeless.
Yes.
We still haven't heard any information of what the plan is for Tampa and Hillsborough County for our encampment. They're supposed to go in place on October the 1st. What's happening with that? And also, when's the last time that we ever asked for an audit of our county government?
Yes.
What is going on with the $9 million a year, $9 billion a year that's going into our taxes, and we're not having a personal statement of where that's going, except on our physical taxes for our homes, which really does not show the whole picture. And the last but not least, why are we not addressing housing for the homeless?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's all my comments are. I think that you have to be politically aware that you have to be part of the solution in our community anymore. All this talk and everything, it goes on and on and on. It does nothing except divide and separate communities. I'm over it. I just want solutions now.
Right. And I think you're right, Layla. If you're not talking solutions, you're not saying anything.
Yes, you're not saying anything. It's all blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Show me the money. Show me where you go to the county commission meeting and hold them accountable and ask them what's going on.
Yeah, and it's important people understand that's where the seat of power really is at the county level.
You have to vote. If you're not voting, you don't. You're all this stuff doesn't mean anything. You have to vote.
Yes, right.
So, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Layla, from Brandon. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This is Community Speaks, and that's my time. Of course, we're going to get ready for getting back to the music with It's the Music Monday. But first, we're going to get some news updates from The Scoop. But I want to thank you for joining me here and calling me today and writing me emails to talk about and put all of these issues in perspective. And we just got to get engaged and involved. So stay tuned. This is Community Speaks here on WMNF Tampa.